Thank you very much. I'm indeed a lexicographer at the INL, INT. We changed names and I can still not get used to it. But I'm also responsible for corpus building, lexicon building, and my main focus is historical material. And as corpus building lead for this project, it's with that hat on that I'm doing this presentation. So I tried to start with something I heard in the workshop on Wednesday about studying the phenomenon of kidney stones. So for the Netherlands, if you do want to do diachronic research on the phenomenon of kidney stones, there's an ample opportunity to research this. There's this nice Delver website from KB, in which I looked for kidney stones, and I even tried a historical spelling variant, and you get some nice results. But I could also go to the Digital Library of Dutch Literature, and then I'll discover that in a translation of a letter of Erasmus, that he suffered from kidney stones there. I could also go to the nice resources at the Huygens Institute, which were digitized, and they have a full text search on all their digitized books, and I'll find some occurrences of kidney stones in there. I could also go even to the parliamentary papers, parliamentary proceedings of the Dutch government, and there's talk about kidney stones. Or I could use a present-day corpus like we host at INT and find all information on kidney stones and even order it on date. But the issue is, it's on different locations. There's different ways, you saw it, of accessing the data. The data has different formats, different metadata schemes, and we don't know exactly what is available everywhere. And there's also the historical language issue. If you go diachronically, and especially for Dutch, you have to deal with. So what a group of research decided to do is ask for a grant to be able to build a diachronic corpus for research starting from the 6th century, from 600 to present day. And the aim was to allow researchers to research Dutch language, culture, and society. So it had to accommodate literary, linguistic, and historical research. The result would be in a research portal, that's the idea, which allows more than searching, but has also tooling, ways of building your own subcorpus and searching, etc. It's there, it's Nederlab.nl. So it's funded by the National Funding Agency, and we organized the project in 3 tracks. There was an infrastructure track who took care of the research portal. There was the tool track who took care of linguistic annotation, OCR post-correction, entity linking, and there's the data track, for which I was responsible, for lexicon building, historical evaluation material, for linguistic annotation, and a corpus conversion. At least at a given point we took over from the Meters Institute. The result of this is currently a corpus of 10 billion words with at least 40 billion annotations. So we did quite a bit of work there. And it would look like that if you would search for kidney stones like I did in the Nederlab corpus. So I will talk about metadata and especially the diachronic text corpus and what we were up against and what we had to deal with. So we processed so far, we processed 25 different collections. The formats, the text formats we had to deal with was from Alto, TI XML, ABI XML, proprietary XML, Word documents, PDF, and Folia, which is a linguistic annotation format used in the Netherlands and which is also the end format to put all the data through the tool chain for linguistic annotation. The metadata was in DIDL, TI headers, proprietary XML, CMDI. I left out the Excel sheets we also got from people. And I want to talk to you about the metadata requirements, but not discuss formats, but really what information do we need there. I'm just a very pragmatic person. I love standards and I love the idea of standards, But the first thing I do when I look at the standard is not what is the standard, but is it in there what I need? And do the metadata have things that I need in there? So I focus on a couple of basic things. If you want to analyze the characteristics of a particular author, you need to know which text in your corpus was written by the author. If you want to research a phenomenon over time, you want to have the exact date of your material. And also if you do language development, the same thing. So we set out with a bunch of metadata requirements. The entire list is there. I will not go through all of them, but accurate provenance, identify hours and link it to a thesaurus, the genre classification, possibilities to keep collection-specific metadata, retain the link to the source so that we can link from Nederlab to Delver or to other resources, because we are Corpus, but we know we are one version of the data, version control information, etc., etc., etc. A long list of requirements, but I'm a simple person. I want to know who wrote this, if it's possible to know that, when did the author write these words, what is the date of the witness, where I found it in, the physical object carrying the text. And I explain later a little bit more why that is so important for me then as a linguist. And I want to try and explain this talk a little bit why the metadata accompanying digital objects coming from digital libraries, archives and other electronic text collections are not sufficient. So, I go with examples. If you go for historical language, they come to us in manuscripts and in printed text. So this manuscript is from Jacob van Maarland, who is a 13th century author, and this is an encyclopedia, De Nature Bloemen. Beautiful encyclopedia, written around 1270, we can estimate that, but this is an example of a manuscript that came down to us in around 1350, 1365. It means that the language, because of the historical language in this manuscript, is not 13th century language, but it's the language of the copyist writing this version in 14th century. So, two dates. You have the date of the text, the time it was written, which has influence, and the date of the witness, the time it was written down. But you have the same thing for a published material, like Hooft, for instance. His history, Nederlands Historien, was written between 1628 until he died in 1647. But only part of the Nederlands Historien was printed during his lifetime, and the rest after his demise. So the date witness and the date text here, there's also a gap over here. So if you would then look at what we would need, if you look at text and the text as a whole like that, so there is Jacob van Maarland who thought of this text, and there's a version there are different versions I will tell you, but around 1350, that's the manuscript, that's a manifestation of this work. But there was this nice guy, Verwijs, who took this version of the manuscript and thought, I'll make a critical text edition. And in 1878, Verwijs got a critical text edition of Maarland's De Nature Bloemen. What do we get as information, as metadata from this digital object? The publication date of the edition. That's it. So if I would look for Maarland and using the metadata as is, I will never find it, because if I do a range from 1300 to 1500, it is dated 1878. So that's the text as a whole, but what we do when we research and use text material, we look also at the content. So the easiest content is this nice little book. It's by Mien Visser-Duker, Baron van Hipplepip. It's a story about a frog. I have something with frogs. My name is, a poet is a frog, so maybe I chose that. No, just kidding. I mean that this is easy because this is a first publication, and every word in the single book is by Mien Visser-Duker. So no problem. I can just take the metadata from the book as an object and can process it. No work to be done. This is also an original, not an edition, about burgerlijke huishouding, about housekeeping by Zazie, and it's printed by Cornelis van Damme. And there you already have the challenges, because you don't only have, it comes from the DBNL, so I took this. You don't only have the actual book, but there's a front matter with a text by Cornelis van Damme. He wrote an intro, 2 intros. There's poems by different authors, some of it only known with initials, others not. And then there's a prologue and the actual text there. So the metadata of the book as a whole, as a digital object, doesn't suffice here. This is a more modern one. This is a book on Antilliaans Nederlands, Dutch of the Antilles. This is also very challenging, because if you would say, I want to know how Vervoorn wrote and what he wrote, he keeps on quoting all kinds of texts from other authors. So the date witnessed that is the same as the publication date of this book, but the date of the text of all these individual texts is different, and the authors are also different. And we have that also for the history of the Dutch East Indian Company by Peter van Dam. This is a really nice book, because he describes the history of the Dutch company, but he has all these appendices in which he quotes different resources or summarizes, and they are different from date and from author than the original text. So if you do simple taking over the metadata, which is elaborate on the Huygens website, that's not sufficient for your research. So the last and the most challenging type of documents we had is a corpus of 15th and 16th century Dutch, the resolutions of the Town Council of Alkmaar. It's like a diary with entries from different dates, and to really substantiate some of the things they say, they quote and they make copies of earlier documents. So within the running text, you don't only get divisions with entries from different dates, but then there's other text quoted. So the metadata information is even more complex. So when you have for a challenge for a large corpus like that, we started off with the simplest way of corpus processing. We wanted, the aim was to get a feeling of, can we handle so much data? Can the research project handle so much data? We wanted to test out post-correction, and we wanted to have ground truth quality material. So from these 3 collections, from KB newspaper collections, the early Dutch books online, and the DBNL collection, we just processed it in the same format. We have the metadata in our own metadata format, which I'll show you a little bit later on. And we just did simple conversion and see where we got, because we thought it was the most sensible thing to do. And then a beta version of the research portal was launched in 2015, and we could look at the result. And we immediately discovered that lacking these accurate dates is an issue, not only for searching, but also because we wanted to apply different linguistic annotation strategies for different periods of Dutch language. And I got a simple question from the person doing the processing: can you get me all the 17th century Dutch text? We'll train it with whatever, and I'll do this strategy. I said, I can't give you. It's not in the metadata from the library. So that was the reason why in the second round, when we had smaller corpora, we thought, let's do it the way we want it and we prefer most, and which will give the highest quality of information on our text. So we changed our strategy instead of going from the collection format to the folia format. We did an intermediate format in TEI, because TEI is easier to work with when you want to visually analyze the passing result and if you want to do some manual correction. What we discussed heavily is we said there's a series of books, like the collection of letters or a diary. We don't want in our corpus this entire book as a digital object. Let's treat that as ground material for our corpus and extract these texts which we need and give them accurate metadata. So for a text edition of in several volumes of, for instance, letters, we took out each letter, we passed it separately, and we gave each letter the accurate metadata. So that if you search for letters of a particular author, in all these collections you get the letters, the senders and the addressees, they reply and you get answers, but you see in the metadata, it's the letters of Hoofd or it's the letters of Vondel. And we wanted to know who the guy was who was writing the answer to Vondel, because that was also in that collection. So we passed that, and we also determined what is a text. For sometimes a quoted text would be part of the entire structure of the running text, or it could be just a separate text as a kind of separate document in a larger collection. And we tried to distinguish date witness and date text. Date text is still an issue. If you use text editions or knowledge, there's very little knowledge about when a particular author wrote this particular text. So that is a challenge. I've been reading through introductions also of scholars talking about their work and about the editions they used, and it would be nice to have a little more structured information and also that insight on the researcher's part doing the publication. But anyway, what did that mean? That if we look at this section of Van Dam, all these have separate metadata, and we also try to separate footnotes from actually running text in the TEI and then in the folia, so not to be bothered by a text from other authors or not to have the correct metadata. Or for the other document which I talked, that's quoted, kopie bij burgemeesteren, we distinguished it and we made sure also this text had accurate metadata. So date text is different than date witness and in these texts. And finally, and this the third strategy for the remaining material was that we had historical corpora that were up to our norms and values, or a modern corpus, and that was really conceived, that these data sets were conceived as corpora, so the conversion to what we needed was easier. I must say that Henny Brugman was not really happy with me when I decided to be more specific, because the original schema for the CMDI metadata was you have a title, you have a dependent title, title of an article in a collection or a series title, and then you have a Nederlab person, and each of these profiles have their own specific information and administrative information and collection specific. But I introduced document part, which could be part of NL title and dependent title, which makes searching also and indexing more difficult, an issue is now trying to resolve. But I said I want to extend that metadata scheme. We'll only do the work once on these collections. I want it correct straight away. So after this adventure, which will continue, I want to present some concluding remarks, and as a result of some of my frustration when having to deal with this. Taking again the example of the Nature Bloemen by Jacob van Maarland, there are several manuscripts in several text editions in different digital collections and corpora. But if you take the edition of Verwees, which I had, and you go to KB, it's in Delver in the Google Book Collection and in the DBNL with different metadata information. And without the information about the date of the witness of the edited text, which is a pity because that information, for instance, is in the database of the Bibliotheca Nederlandica Manuscripta in the latest version. There's no link between books and editions and the content of it. Another issue was that we published, put a lot of effort into identifying authors, and I wish I could have from the libraries just a catalog description with a persistent identifier linking to this book is done by this author, and you can't find, and I wouldn't have been having had to do all this linking with my team ourselves. So I think we should evolve towards metadata models which take both library requirements and diachronic research into account. When I look at all these nice tools about historical development and manual and visualizations, you have to imagine, if people have seen me in the room and asking critical questions, you have to imagine me thinking, oh, historical texts and phenomena, what are they counting? And especially as a linguist, I know that it's always a mixture of dates and authors, etc. And I think we also, both researchers and libraries, there's one edition of this book. It's in of Verwijs. It's in several libraries. Let's please agree on this is the information we have, and researchers use that information in their corpora. They could add enrichment like witness date or information, link it. So for us poor corpus builders, we just only take that, convert to metadata, and bother with doing the more detailed metadata in the text itself, which I think is not a task of a library. But if we could work together like that, our lives would have been a lot easier and would have been way happier. So what will happen now? What is the future of Nederlab? Both the Meertens Institute and the INT have agreed that they will maintain the infrastructure, and we will see if we can come up, we will build a consortium, and we want to see whether we can have a system where when researchers apply for funding and they create a small corpus, that we can help them build their corpus, and that their corpus can have a place in this environment. We want to, I really want to reprocess the stage 1 collections. I already did the work on the DBNL collection in that sense that from all the text editions, I have for the core historical text all the correct metadata. It's not passed in the text yet, but it's in our metadata database. We will try improve linguistic annotation of the Nederlab portal within a Clara Plus project. So I was really happy to hear about part of speech tagging methods and strategies, because historical Dutch is a real challenge, and if you have a diachronic corpus like that, it is really, we're way not there yet, and we hope eventually to be able, with Meertens Institute, with their task and the HUC, I would say, the Digital Humanities Cluster, to improve the portal. And that was my story.
Thanks very much for this. Thanks very much for this passionate story into corpus building and the challenges of metadata. There's already a question there for Katrien, and another one at the back.
Thank you, that's really interesting. I'm struggling with exactly the same for historical Welsh and Tibetan, so it's really interesting to see how you're dealing with these things. I have two short questions. One about folio format.
Yeah.
If it's easily convertible to, for example, RDF, so that you can actually link the data. And the other one is, how do you actually do your XML editing? Do you use just an XML editor, or do you use some nice GUI, like, I don't know, DATeCH or whatever?
The second question is the easiest one for me to answer. All the XML processing was done, and when the evaluation and some manual correction was done in Oxygen. There's nice ways of having an author view within Oxygen and things to programs to make a correction easier, and we're getting better and better at that. So Oxygen we really basically standard on. The Folia format, turning it into RDF, I'm not sure. it's a very complicated format because it has standoff annotation. So every annotation layer within the Nederlab project is done standoff. I know RDF and I know Folia, and if some person would say, how would you do that? I'm not sure if it's easily done. I don't know, yes, if you can answer that.
But what exactly do you mean by transformation from an XML document to RDF? Something like what Christian Sarkos is doing in Leipzig, something like that? Or?
Well, it can be done in different ways. I was just curious because you seem to be passionate about linking the data in some way. So my sort of idea would be to sort of go for RDF to begin with, although you seem to start from the XML part because you have a lot of markup, which I have as well. So I'm sort of now trying to just incorporate at least unique identifiers within the TI headers, so I can at least grab like sentences and things. So I don't know the folio format, so I've never worked with that, so I was just wondering how you could do it.
Well, for this corpus, all the relevant search elements do have persistent identifiers.
Okay. So that's no problem then, that's all I was doing. That's good, thanks.
There's a question at the back.
Thanks very much. I really like this talk because not only because I happen to be interested in the issues, but because of the way you articulated it very well. So you had the example of this De Naturen Blumen, where it was the date was composite between the 13th and 14th century.
Yeah.
But then you also had these critical editions of East India Company records, other letters, and so forth.
Yeah.
And then you also had newspapers. And what you said about the medieval manuscript, well, you know, what we really have is evidence for 14th century language, not 12th century language. Wouldn't that also apply to these other sources as well, right? Because newspapers, if they say they print something in 1860, the poem could have actually been written in 1840, and it's just an evergreen, you know, reprinted work, or you know, the East India Company records could have been normalized to the 1920s or whenever I don't know if that work in particular did any normalization, but you know, wouldn't these same issues apply? And would you say that, well, look, it's just a higher value to concentrate on the divergence between 13th and 14th century than to concentrate on the divergence between 1840 and 1860? You know, where do you come down with the priorities in this process?
Yeah, we decided that for the newspaper collection is a very difficult one because it's OCR. There's automatic article parsing, and there's no way in these millions of pages you could do this in more detail. We looked at the newspaper collection, and really the majority of what is in there is really day-to-day publishing. So we decided that we would say, okay, for this collection, considering the quality of the transcription as well, we will not try and resolve this detailed encoding. I didn't even complicate matters. I could have talked about hidden quotes, which are in this example I showed you of the Antilliaans Nederlands, where you could really clearly see, because of the typography, where a text starts and ends. That is easier to do than find the hidden quotes in a document. That is why I would also, as a linguist, if you do linguistics research, if I put effort, I would put effort into ground truth quality digitized material, to put in so much effort into this detailed information. And secondly, for everything, and then they know that, and I've told that also in the workshop, for every analysis that is then done and counted for and in applications or what, I always want to go back to the data. If I draw conclusions and I see something way off, I like the automatic clustering. I like all the techniques to do processing, as long as I can check what has been counted and what I think is maybe an interesting phenomenon I can see in the data. So whatever tool developers do, for me, I look at the nice colors and I say, oh yeah, but what is an easy way now to connect these visualizations to the actual data? And that would be a way to resolve some of the more detailed encoding. For a corpus of 40 million words, you will never be able to do. And that is why, yeah, it's kind of a trade-off. And for me, it was quite frustrating to have to decide, okay, we go for this, we don't do that yet, and we hope eventually to have all this good quality material from critical editions, etc., which I hope will have that same information, so that growingly we have still a higher, better quality corpus.
Right. Thank you.
Time for one last question? Yes, please, Grace.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I was wondering, you mentioned the need to move towards a common infrastructure to share metadata. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on how we could achieve that.
I had a discussion with Henny on that. I said, should I write this down or not? And he said, if you don't write it down, nobody will even try and think about it, that it is necessary. I had discussions with the former director of the DBNL, Kees Klopwijk, who said, in the libraries there is some common sense, there's some awareness that they want to find out more about metadata and what do the researchers need and how do they look at digital objects when they use it. And it was actually Steven Kleijsen from KB, and we used all this KB data, who said, please, could you please write this down for once so that we can understand better? Because it starts with talking about it, I think, and then hopefully maybe I can sit down with KB, who does all this Dutch library stuff, but I'm just a small pawn and just explaining what we run up against. And but I think there's a lot of standardization going on, and there's talk about standards, but the content on what you tag is also very important. And I hope that the content discussion in the metadata stuff is also taken into account more. So, yeah.
So on that note, let's thank Katrien very much again.
Okay.